What's happening for him? This is one part of a two-part series. The other part is what I like about Gundam Operation 2. If that sounds interesting to you, I would definitely recommend checking it out. Today, I'm going to be talking about what I don't like about Pathfinder 2e. I'm going to try and go as fast as possible because I've had this cooking for a long time. So I'm just tired with it and I just want to get it out there. So first of all, I think Pathfinder 2e is good at what it's trying to do. But I just don't like what it is. Alright. And you shouldn't feel bad about if you like Pathfinder 2e. You shouldn't feel bad that I don't like it. It's a great system. But, you know, as a Pathfinder First Edition fan, there's a lot of things I don't like about it. But First Edition is flawed, but I think it gets mischaracterized and it takes some flack that it doesn't necessarily deserve. The biggest issue with First Edition is not min-maxing or the height of power, in my opinion. There's insane things you can do in Pathfinder First Edition, like the Painter Wizard, for example, where you just get infinite wishes or other such shenanigans. That their sky really is no limit. So it's not so much that min-maxing is the issue, because if you really wanted to truly min-max, then you could do some barbaric stupid stuff, right? And no GM would reasonably allow. But at the same time, the issue really is that there is a misalignment with the power level or the expectation of the game, and that's not so much an issue with situations where GMs can look over sheets and discuss and have a session 0. It's more issue with either event play or Pathfinder Society play, which I think is a lot of what goes into informing the design decisions of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Pathfinder Society in particular incentivizes this type of min-maxing because you don't necessarily know what you're going to go up against or what to prepare for, and because Pathfinder tends to use character death as the main risk, and there are a lot of save or die or save or be maimed essentially effects that incentivize making a really robust character that's annoying to adjudicate for, or that min-maxy type behavior. And so the main problem with Pathfinder First Edition, as always cited, and I think it's true, is that there are a lot of trap options, and it takes a lot of system mastery or knowledge of a large number of minute details to create the character that you want to make. It's easy to pick an option that sounds cool and in traditional Paizo fashion is niche and bad. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about how the obsession with balance, I think, is a little bit misplaced, because balance isn't necessarily what makes combat interesting, at least to me. It's the narrative impact of the combat or encounter. And so some of the balancing aspects of Pathfinder 2nd Edition don't really speak to me. For instance, the math tightness is really good for when you're preparing encounters beforehand, but I think it's harder for adjudicating spontaneity, because unless you have the charts memorized for every level, what's going to be an easy, medium, or hard challenge for any specific skill for a certain proficiency, it's not so easy to just spitball a number as it is in Pathfinder First Edition. That makes sense for the challenge, I would say. Weapon variety, I think they've gone in the wrong direction, where the critical system and the weapon types and the properties make the weapons feel more monotonous than they even are in First Edition, where I feel like they're too similar or have too much overlap just because there's an insane quantity of weapons available. One of my smaller nitpicks is that the ancestry progression makes no sense because, like, ostensibly, species that are known to be able to fly aren't able to fly until like 8th or 11th level or higher level, and so um, their like inherent abilities aren't available to the PC that you would like expect. And so it's kind of nitpicky, but it just kind of breaks my immersion in a little way. I think the skill feats are whack in general, and for instance, some of the skill feats are actually useful in combat, like combat medicine or bon mot, and because this is a tactics game, whereas in Pathfinder First Edition, I view a character build as similar to like a commander deck in Magic the Gathering, where it's like you're showing me what you think is cool, and I'm like respecting your choices and your art and that kind of thing. Where in a tactics game, we're paired up and we're a team and we're trying to defeat an objective. You making suboptimal choices affects our probability of winning an encounter and thus the probability of my character dying. And so I feel like I have an incentive to make more optimal choices than I would in Pathfinder First Edition, which is weird because you would say Pathfinder First Edition is the more min-maxy game. But really, I think the pressure from moving towards a tactics game rather than like a more sandboxy role-playing game creates weird pressures to min-max. So another thing towards that is that dedications are really, really good. It's hard for me to not justify taking one because some of your options are really good. Like, you don't give up that much for them either. And on the flip side of that, there aren't very many quote-unquote archetypes, which are really functionally completely different than First Edition, but there aren't that many options for them that would justify not taking a dedication or doing something else instead. I don't really like the starting ability scores, just the way the stat arrays work. I prefer the random generation. It's kind of minor, it's really preference, but my main complaint with combat in First Edition is that it's too centered around abusing the action economy, and primarily in boss fights where you're trying to stun them or apply conditions to them or essentially make them unable to harm you in any way. And I would say Pathfinder 2e moves even further in that direction in terms of, because of the removal of attacks of opportunity as a global rule, movement is more centralized around denying your opponent's actions. So D20 plus modifier versus DC is so beautiful, and degrees of success...
Leave me alone!
Degrees of success is so ugly that it physically hurts me. It feels a bit like putting the circle in the square hole, because 2d10 has existed basically forever, and it's a lot more elegant than degrees of success. And so I wanted to talk about what I actually find as like the major flaws in Pathfinder First Edition, and what other people think they are. So I've already talked about trap choices and a little bit about rules complexity. It's just I think they still have this problem. They're overly verbose sometimes, and they're not clear. They don't make the best use of their allotted space a lot of times. Um, I think the stat blocks aren't laid out in a very nice manner, and they don't necessarily help the GM as well as they could have in running the monster or building encounters with the monster. Um, so the martial caster disparity, I think, is a bit overblown, personally, and I have to say this as someone who enjoys playing martials a lot. And my paladin is my favorite class. Um, the main issue I have with first edition is the disparity in skills per level. I feel like it should be flipped in that marshals get more skills base. Um, for one, because they don't have to allot their time doing esoteric learning and gestures and all this kind of things that go into casting. So they should have more time to develop their skills. Although they do have to do a certain amount of time developing their martial skills as well. So, it's whatever. But I think the turn duration is a bit of an issue in Pathfinder First Edition. There can be a lot of analysis paralysis in decision making, although there doesn't necessarily have to be. But I think this also goes in the wrong direction in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, where there's even more options for you to do in combat, and the difference between them is not necessarily as clear. I think there's a difficulty in keeping track of modifiers in play, but I also think this is less impactful than it is in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, primarily because each modifier is less relevant than it would be in second edition due to the aforementioned degree of success system. So I think additionally the number gore and bloat has gotten worse just because so many of the modifiers and DCs creep as 8 character levels, and so the numbers just go up as you progress. It seems kind of redundant to say, but not every modifier and DC goes up the same way as it does in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So this is a bit minor as well, but it's kind of not clear what is flavor text and what is the mechanical effect of a spell, and it's up to the GM to adjudicate what is what. So like certain things are written in such a way that their mechanical effect doesn't necessarily equate to how the spell is described, and I think that's fine because a lot of the fun in Pathfinder First Edition is like describing how your character is casting a spell or doing an effect, and so the mechanics are more important, but them being cleanly separated would better enhance the playability there. So this is more about like it's hard to describe what you want to do without metagaming in Pathfinder sometimes, and I think I'll talk more about this later. And my other main issue is that some thematic niches for characters lack as many viable options as they need to make a compelling character sometimes, and it's very few and far between because Paizo has published so much. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Rules Lawyers list. Definitely go check them out and go support their social work if you haven't. So I don't think, as I addressed earlier, that they've necessarily improved the complexity in combat due to the analysis paralysis issues or more options, which isn't necessarily a negative if you enjoy that type of thing. Like I said earlier, it's just it doesn't add anything for me in particular, or the choices that they have don't feel as meaningful to me as the ones in first edition. Um, so I don't really know that much about stacking spells, so I'm just not going to comment about that. The imbalance between characters, I think it has been addressed because, you know, the disparity between them, the top and the bottom of the power level, has been compressed. So there's less variance in the starting place of characters. I think the complexity has been reduced a lot in character building, so it's a lot easier to build a character in general, and it's a lot easier to build a pretty competent character. All things considered. So, magic items being less wondrous, I think this was about, it's been a while since I watched the video, but I think this was about the sheer quantity of magic items. And I think somewhat, yes, like magic items are more wondrous because they're not as expected, but at the same time, it has the kind of same issue where the characters are expected a certain amount of wealth per level in first edition, or it's like striking runes and a certain amount of other gear in second edition, where you'll just accrue a base amount of magic items. And it's a highly magical setting where magic's incredibly prolific and magic items are also incredibly prolific, so I don't see it as necessarily being a flaw in general. I kind of wish they would have just gone for the automatic bonus progression rules as being the base, but they're a little bit of cowards that way. So, boring melee combat, lack of mobility, I disagree in general, for a number of reasons. I think that Attack of Opportunities is really interesting as a gameplay mechanic that I'm going to talk about in more detail later. Difficult to balance encounters, save or suck. I would say yes. In terms of Pathfinder encounters, their second edition encounters are almost guaranteed to last longer and generate a more predictable outcome, just because in order to do that, they've increased the number of rounds that a combat encounter must take. And so they've also in turn like decreased kind of the average power level of characters at a certain level between each edition. Like for instance, this is kind of part of the martial caster disparity, is that like casters have save or suck, or save or basically be incapacitated, save or die, right? But on the flip side, it's somewhat unreliable, and it's a limited resource, whereas martials can, in slightly, I would say, like, whereas it would take a caster one turn to disable an enemy using one like appropriate spell slot, the equivalent martial would take like 2 attacks to disable the same enemy, which is an unlimited resource, if they're doing like normal damage. At least in my experience, that seems to be how it breaks down on average. But there are edge cases like bosses. I guess it's not so much an edge case because it's a popular case, but there are cases like I talked about where these spells can become problematic in terms of making a combat or encounter unsatisfying. And then the 5-minute adventuring day, I think like mainly the main thing is that they've introduced non-magical healing as like a staple. Like I mentioned, early combat medicine and the healing skills in general are basically feel like must takes at least one person in the party, and focus spells I think are the other thing, where it's there's another resource to manage, but I never found it to be particularly engaging. And also, like, it takes time out of combat, I believe, to refocus, so it's just another narrative thing where it's like, alright, it's just eating away at the time kind of in-game. Yeah, the same way that people complain about, like, short rests and stuff, like, or like my character, the 5-minute adventuring day. It's just a little 5-minute adventuring day. It's like, okay, I need to refocus, whatever, you know. I would rather it be, what I'm saying basically is I would rather it be phrased as like at the end of combat you refocus or whatever. So this is a little bit going into what I talked about earlier with character creation. I don't necessarily hate the stat arrays because I'm a fan of point buy. Point buy is my favorite way to do it. It's just there's no incentive for having a negative ability score, or like what I equivocate to a flawed character, or a character who has like is naturally uncharismatic or is naturally brittle, or weak, undexterous, etc. Some other minor things that bother me about Pathfinder 2nd Edition, for one, the economy doesn't really make sense. And because it's a tactics game and you want to communicate with your teammates or your party members a lot about what the plan of action is and what the course of action is, you end up doing a lot of metagaming about things that your character wouldn't necessarily know or be able to communicate at the time. And a lot of the things that were once class features and basically like a fundamental part of the class's identity are now optional, and they take up your resources to have them, or they're not part of the base class. One thing I additionally don't like is that how much of the power is tied to a character's level rather than their investment in something. Like, here's a cherry-picked example, of course. A comparison between two characters in each edition, with one with maximum investment at level 1, short of skill focus, and one with relatively minimal investment at level 4. I don't really like casters in 2nd edition. Alright, my attack of opportunity rant. So, basically, attacks of opportunity add an entire layer of depth and complexity to combat that is often ignored or overly simplified. For example, almost no one mentions how you can use acrobatics to move through threatened spaces. And I really enjoy how attacks of opportunity reinforce the idea of how much area a character controls. Another complaint I have about 2e is that although it is pretty rules complete and you don't need to, or if you're looking for rulings, you can find them or how rules work, but even certain core things like forced movement, which are very important for a tactics game, aren't well defined, and you have to go to the community to search for answers. Going back to marshals versus casters, we've got a little bit of syncretism here, because one thing I think that's not touched upon often when this debate or discussion's brought up is that marshals are generally the better users of magic items. Typically, for me, the prototypical magic item is a magic weapon, and who uses that better than a martial character? But even going further than that, they tend to be more mobile and more hardy than the casters, respectively, and so generally are able to apply magic items, the majority of magic items, more effectively. And so when the average power level of magic is brought down, and enchantments and stuff, it also affects the marshals as well. Pathfinder 1e doesn't necessarily have to be complicated to play. It's not impossible to make a character that is very simple to play, although very competent, and you can have a lot of fun doing so. Part of why I don't really enjoy Pathfinder 2nd Edition is because it reminds me so much, like I previously mentioned, of tactics games, which I enjoy because you control the multiple units and forces rather than in spite of it, like you would in a TTRPG where each player controls their own character and makes choices based off of their character's motivations and the circumstances at hand. And I feel I have a bad tendency to tell people how to play their own characters in games to begin with, so I don't really like anything that reinforces that feeling. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Paladin because it's my favorite class, and I think it says a lot about the game design differences in the two editions in general. One minor thing, because I know it's been fixed, but upon release, the Paladin had to be lawful stupid a little bit because they could never take advantage of others' lie or cheat, which generally sounds good, but included those that are evil. In addition to that, they must respect lawful authority of legitimate leadership wherever they go and follow its laws. So if you're in Cheliax or wherever, I believe it would be intended that you follow their laws. So I wanted to talk a bit about Smite Evil and the other features of the Paladin in First Edition, because I think it really says a lot about what the intended purpose of the class is in general. And more specifically, the target of Smite Evil. So Smite Evil increases your damage against someone who's evil. But in addition to that, if the target of the Smite Evil is an evil subtype, an evil dragon, or an evil undead creature, or an undead creature in general, the bonus damage on the successful attack increases to 2 points of damage per level. So, it's a lot of words here, but basically what the feature does is it allows you to take on threats. Specifically here, the archetypical BBEGs of campaigns, dragons, liches, etc., and be the sort of prototypical knight in shining armor character. They're immune to fear effects, which adds into this fantasy, and at 5th level, they're able to get a steed companion. All of these kind of add to the prototypical knight in shining armor fantasy who is able to rise up and attack the bad guy, whereas in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the class is more centered around, instead of offensively taking on the enemy firsthand, it's more about defensive play and protecting your teammates. If you wanted to play a more offensive martial character, you could play the fighter or something else, but the fantasy doesn't really transfer over in any meaningful way between the two games. A lot of the charm of Paizo writing remains between the two editions, like niche options that are bad, archetypes that don't really do anything, subsystems that are broken and will never really receive attention or repair. Overall, I think a lot of the charm in Pathfinder 2nd Edition comes from the Paizo adventure paths, which I think they do a good job building. And I'm also excited for the CRPG that's coming out and Starfinder 2nd Edition. So I'm looking forward to those, and I appreciate you listening to this garbage, and have a good day.